Coming to you from the Forge of Freedom studio in the heart of America, a podcast dedicated to preserving freedom and inspiring personal success. Freedom is born and lives through you, the individual, and it dies in the shadows of tyranny. Motivating our listeners to become well-rounded, freedom-minded people with the body of an athlete, the mind of a stoic, and the spirit of a warrior. The tree of liberty lives on through you, the Forge of Freedom. And now here's your host, Alex Ooley.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Ooley, and this is episode 20 of the Forge of Freedom. Today we will be discussing Aristotle's 12 virtues and his concept of the good life. The ancient Greeks considered eudaimonia, or sometimes pronounced eudaimonia, as the ultimate human good, which roughly corresponds to a life well lived or a happy, flourishing life. And although it doesn't translate easily into English, eudaimonia was not a destination that, once achieved, led to a state of bliss. Instead, happiness was really viewed as a dynamic, ongoing activity that centered on the pursuit of arete, or what was roughly translated as excellence. And it centered on this arete, or excellence, and virtue, and it encompasses a broader notion of living a fulfilling and meaningful life rather than simply experiencing pleasure or positive emotions. I discussed this notion of eudaimonia with Aaron Spurling during episode 13 when we discussed Stoic philosophy. And this eudaimonia is a concept that will certainly come up frequently on this channel. And that's by design, because we want our listeners to live a good life. And a good life is not something that you live by accident. It requires intentionality, discipline, and purpose. And Aristotle, an ancient Greek philosopher, believed that eudaimonia, or human flourishing, is the highest human good, and it's something that's desirable for its own sake rather than for the sake of something else. He held that every living or human-made thing has a unique function or activity that distinguishes it from other things, and the highest good of a thing consists of the good performance of its characteristic function. Thus, human virtue or excellence consists of whatever traits or qualities enable humans to perform their characteristic function, which Aristotle believed to be their ability to reason. So, for instance, a knife is considered to be a good knife if it's sharp, if it's durable, if it's easy to hold. Those are the characteristics that make a knife unique and uniquely good or excellent. But a human being is different, in what makes a human being good or different or excellent. And it's our ability to reason and our ability to act virtuously. In his ethical treatises, the Nicomachean Ethics and the Eudaimonean Ethics, Aristotle proposed answers to the question of what constitutes eudaimonia. In the Nicomachean Ethics, he argued that eudaimonia consists of philosophical or scientific contemplation in accordance with intellectual virtues of wisdom and understanding. But he also allowed that action in the political sphere in accordance with practical wisdom and moral virtues, such as justice and temperance, can lead to eudaimonia in a secondary degree. So there's sort of the moral dimension and the political dimension. In the Eudaimonean Ethics, he maintained that eudaimonia consists of activity of the soul in accordance with perfect or complete virtue, which includes both intellectual and moral virtues. But both of these answers agree that eudaimonia is an activity rather than a state and necessarily involves the exercise of reason. The virtues or excellences that constitute eudaimonia are not innate talents, but rather they are abiding traits that arise through long habituation, reflection, and the benefits of appropriate social experiences and circumstances. Therefore, eudaimonia must be the achievement of a complete life rather than a fleeting moment. However, the composition of these excellences or virtues that make up a eudaimonic life, a good life, was a topic of debate amongst many of the what were considered Hellenistic philosophers, or some of these ancient Greek philosophers. Socrates believed that moral virtue alone was necessary to achieve eudaimonia, while Aristotle argued that other types of excellence were also crucial for a well-lived life. And here I want to focus on the virtues that Aristotle emphasized for living a eudaimonic life. And I think these are instructive to us as people who want to live a flourishing life, a good life. I think they're instructive to us to focus on some of these. And there may be others, there may be some that you maybe don't agree with or don't think are as essential or shouldn't be included in the list. But I think that we can sort of reflect on these, and they're helpful to get us thinking about these. So let's get into them. The first one is justice. And justice is the virtue of giving each person what they deserve. It is also known as fairness or equity. Just for example, a just person would treat everyone with fairness and respect, regardless of their race, religion, or social status. And bear in mind too, when I'm talking about each of these virtues, you could talk about each of these an entire podcast or even longer. And justice is one of those virtues that you could really devote a lengthy book to, and certainly an entire podcast. But a lot of these virtues, when we talk about them, we'll talk about them as sort of being the mean between two extremes. Too much of something can be a bad thing, and so can too little of something. And justice, I think, it helps to think of as obviously dealing fairly with others, but it lies kind of between selfishness and selflessness. So justice, it's the virtue of dealing fairly with others. The next one, number 2, is temperance. And temperance is the virtue of moderation in all things. It is also known as self-control or self-discipline. And for example, a temperate person would eat and drink in moderation and would avoid overindulgence in anything. And temperance is the virtue between overindulgence and insensitivity. Aristotle would view the person who never drinks just as harshly as the one who drinks too much, for instance. Number 3, courage. Courage is the virtue of facing danger or difficulty in spite of fear. It is also known as bravery or fortitude. A courageous person would stand up, for instance, for what they believe in, even if it's unpopular. And courage is the midpoint between cowardice and recklessness. A courageous person is one who is aware of the danger but goes in anyway. And I think it's helpful here to emphasize the midpoint, because courage, too much of it, would be reckless. Okay, but too little of it would be cowardice. So we're aiming for that midpoint. Number 4, liberality or generosity is the virtue of giving without expecting anything in return. It is also known as charity or benevolence. And a liberal person, for example, would donate money to charity or help out a friend in need without expecting anything in return. And liberality is the virtue, like I said, of charity, but this is the golden mean. This is the midpoint between miserliness or stinginess and giving more than you can afford. Number 5, magnificence. This one sounds a little strange to us, but magnificence is the virtue of spending money on grand and noble things. It is also known as generosity on a grand scale. Magnificence, by example, would be a person who would donate a large sum of money to build a new hospital or fund a major scientific research project. It could also apply in other circumstances, but for instance, it might include the avoidance of looking shabby. Present yourself in a pleasing and respectable way, but not a vain way. Magnificence is the virtue that rests between stinginess and vulgarity. Aristotle saw no reason really to be ascetic or without taste or want, but also warned against being flashy. All right, so number 5 was magnificence. Number 6, magnanimity. Magnanimity is the virtue of being big-hearted and forgiving. It is also known as greatness of soul. A magnanimous person would forgive someone who has wronged them or help out someone who is less fortunate than them. Magnanimity is the virtue relating to pride, and it is the midpoint between not giving yourself enough credit and having delusions of grandeur. It is a given that you also have to act on this sense of self-worth and strive for greatness. Number 7, truthfulness. Truthfulness is the virtue of speaking the truth, even when it is difficult to do so. It is also known as honesty or sincerity. A truthful person would tell the truth, even if it means getting in trouble. Truthfulness is the virtue of honesty, and Aristotle placed it between the vices of habitual lying and being tactless or boastful. So again, you can see a theme here. These virtues lie between two extremes. Number 8, wittiness. Wittiness is the virtue of using humor to make people laugh. It is also known as cleverness or wit. And a witty person would tell a funny story or make a clever remark that makes people laugh. But again, wittiness is the midpoint between buffoonery and boorishness. And this is the virtue of a good sense of humor. Number 9, friendliness. Friendliness is the virtue of being kind and sociable. It is also known as affability or good nature. And I'm going to take a little extra time on this one. It might be somewhat surprising to talk about friendliness as a virtue or discuss it more so than other virtues. But interestingly, Aristotle emphasized friendliness or friendship in his work as well. Friendliness, while it might not seem like a moral virtue, Aristotle claimed that friendship is a vital part of a life well lived. And this virtue lies between not being friendly at all and being too friendly towards too many people. Aristotle knew that humans were social animals, and being an excellent human required being adept at social skills. And Aristotle put a high premium on having good and noble friends. In fact, he wrote more about friendship than any other moral virtue. And Aristotle believed that there were three types of friendships: those based on utility, where people associate for external or material benefits; those based on pleasure, where companions share interests and enjoy each other's company; and those based on virtue, where friends admire and inspire each other to pursue the good. And while all three types of friendships can contribute to a person's happiness, Aristotle believed that friends of virtue came closest to the standard of arete, or excellence. Therefore, a person would benefit greatly from cultivating such friendships and being that kind of friend to others, seeking companions who encourage their pursuit of excellence and helping others achieve excellence in their own lives. And I think this is really interesting because I think friends, or one friend, can fall into multiple categories. They can be uh, a friend out of utility, but also one that you enjoy spending time with and that helps cultivate virtue. I think a friend could fall into all three. But there are some who only fall into one or the other of these categories. But it's also interesting, and I don't have this information or this study at my fingertips, but there is a study that showed that people tend to be like sort of the sum of the 10 most people, the 10 people they spend the most time with. And I think that Aristotle realized this tendency that you tend to be like those you associate with. And that's why he thought that having good friends and being a good friend was such an important moral virtue. All right, so that was number 9. Number 10, shame. Shame is the virtue of feeling embarrassed when you do something wrong. It is also known as modesty or humility. A person who feels shame would apologize for doing something wrong or try to make things right. And shame is the midpoint between being too shy and being shameless. The person who has the right amount of shame will understand when they have committed a social or moral error, but won't be too fearful not to risk them. Number 11, modesty. Modesty is the virtue of not bragging about your accomplishments. It is also known as humility or self-effacement. A modest person would not boast about their grades or talk about how much money they make. And then finally, number 12, patience. This is the virtue that controls your temper. The patient person must neither get too angry nor fail to get angry when they should. Again, this virtue teaches and conditions you not to lose your temper very often. However, a patient person knows that when to actually get angry, and the whole art is to strike a balance between these two extremes. So there you have it, the 12 virtues identified by Aristotle. And again, we could spend entire episodes on just one of these. And in fact, there have been books written about many of these individually. But according to Aristotle, and this is what I really want to emphasize with this episode, according to Aristotle, achieving excellence in all of these areas and becoming a well-rounded person, a well-rounded individual, means maximizing your potential in every possible aspect. And to attain true happiness and to live a fully flourishing life, Aristotle believed in cultivating all of these virtues. Although there are other areas where Aristotle believed one could achieve excellence, the virtues mentioned above, these 12 virtues that we've talked about, are the main ones he focuses on throughout his work. And more insights into arete, or excellence, can be found in his book dedicated to the subject, The Nicomachean Ethics. However, his philosophy on eudaimonia can also be found in other works, such as Rhetoric, and even his book on household management called Economics. The more you strive to be your best in body, mind, and spirit, and the more you pursue arete, or excellence, in all aspects of your life, the more likely you are to attain the dynamic and active state of eudaimonia, the good life. People are always seeking the formula for happiness, and according to Aristotle, it can be expressed as follows: happiness or flourishing equals eudaimonia, which equals the practice of virtue, which equals excellence. So this is not something that you just achieve and then you're good forever. This is an ongoing effort, an intentional effort to be excellent and to get better at each virtue. And with that, I want to end by sharing a quote with you that was inspired by Aristotle. And the quote appears to have originated with the 1926 book, The Story of Philosophy, in which the author, Will Durant, chronicles the work of history's greatest philosophers, including Aristotle. And the phrase is Durant's attempt at capturing, in his own words, this Aristotelian sentiment, but it's not a direct quotation from Aristotle. And the quote, this quote has been hanging on the wall above my dresser for over 5 years as a reminder to strive for these things each day. And here's the quote: "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit." Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you enjoyed the show, as always, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. Tomorrow, for Monday Gun Day, I'll be releasing an episode with Mike Ooley about armed school teachers and some legislation that recently passed here in Indiana. Next Sunday, I'll be releasing an episode about the question, are vices crimes? And this is a topic that's inspired by the work of Lysander Spooner. Until then, remember, you are the forge of freedom, and be excellent.